All right, so everyone see that?
Yes.
Yep. Okay, so we're going to talk about the destruction, the storm that happened in 3rd Nephi at the time of Christ's crucifixion, as the sign of his death. Okay, so 3rd Nephi 8:10, I'm sure you've all read it, but it's just describes some of the most awesome natural disasters ever recorded in ancient literature. But the question is, what type of natural disasters were they? Did the Nephites experience an earthquake, a hurricane, something else? So what does the Book of Mormon actually say about it? And can science add anything to our understanding? So that's kind of going to be the topic tonight, kind of looking at it from a scientific standpoint. So Mormon starts it off by saying, in the 34th year, in the first month, on the first day of the month, there arose a great storm, such as one had never been known in all the land. So what do we know so far from this verse? Well, we know there's a great storm, and we know that it was different from any other storm the Nephites had experienced in the past. Mormon points this out more than once, that this storm was different than what they were used to, which I find very interesting. So what type of storm was it? Mormon uses several words to describe what happened during the storm. He says there were tempests, whirlwinds, thunderings, and lightnings. So on the surface, it sounds like this great storm could have been a hurricane. This is an image of Hurricane Katrina. I'm sure y'all remember this. But hurricanes have tempests, hurricanes have whirlwinds, hurricanes have thunders and lightnings. So it would kind of fit the description that Mormon's trying to use. However, if this great storm was a hurricane, it was a very strange hurricane for several reasons. Number one, Mormon said there was exceedingly sharp lightning, such as never been known in all the land, and the city of Zarahemla did take fire. So curious to know, how many of you have ever been in a hurricane before? Dennis, Linda, anyone else that I missed? What's it like?
A lot of wind, a lot of water,
Okay.
and it would be hard to figure out how something could catch fire.
Yes. Okay. Very good. Linda, anything else you wanted to add?
No, just if you're near the seaside, you've got these huge walls of water coming at you.
Yeah.
So again, lots of water.
Yeah, water. I was in one on my mission. We had one pass through Maryland and DC area, and that one that stood out to me as well, as how much water and rain it brought with it. So are fires common with hurricanes? Why or why not? As we mentioned, hurricanes bring rain and a lot of it. So even if something within a hurricane's path was struck by lightning, as Zarahemla may have been, the rains that come with the hurricane are likely to put out any fires before they even start. And it's hard for me to imagine how anything in a hurricane's path, let alone an entire city, could have caught on fire. Brant Gardner said this: the combination of storm and tempest would typically indicate rain as well, but none is noted. And indeed, the indication of exceedingly dry wood rather suggests its absence. So an interesting observance there by Brant. The Book of Mormon just doesn't mention any water, rain as part of the storm. And like you said, dry wood kind of suggested it was absent. Another strange characteristic of this hurricane-like storm was that it occurred in the springtime. So how do we know that? Well, Christ was crucified on Passover, which correlates to springtime in North America. So why is that significant? Well, 97% of all hurricanes that hit the Americas occur in the fall. And when the rare hurricane comes in the spring, it's typically less destructive than its fall counterpart. So kind of odd to see a hurricane hit in the spring. So with that being said, it is certainly possible that this great storm could have been a hurricane. If the Lord wants to send a hurricane in April, he can certainly do so. And if the Lord wants to set fire to something in a hurricane's path, he could certainly do that as well, right? However, a couple quotes that make me believe otherwise. Joseph Fielding Smith said, "The Lord works in accordance with natural law." And Brigham Young, with regard to miracles, there's no such thing save to the ignorant. God is a scientific character in that he lives by science or strict law. So these quotes.
Can I say something here, Rick?
Yeah, please.
I mean, think about Elijah with the priests of Baal, though, with all the water on those altars, and then he called down fire from heaven and it consumed the water.
So it can't happen.
Yeah, so it can happen.
Yeah,
It's
interesting.
fun enough.
Yeah. Yeah, interesting point. And that may have been what happened. I don't want to rule that out. But where the option is of using natural laws to accomplish his purposes, I think that's usually more common with those type of miracles, or God using natural laws to accomplish his purposes. So you're right, we don't know. My personal opinion is that the Lord didn't do anything out of the ordinary with this particular storm. So if we're correct in our assumption that it was a common natural disaster and yet not a hurricane, then how do we explain the hurricane-like symptoms? So how do we explain the tempest, the thunders, whirlwind, and sharp lightning, for example? The first thing we need to remember is that this was unlike any other storm the Nephites had experienced. So Mormon mentioned this twice, that this storm had never been known in all the land. It says the lightnings had never been seen before in all the land. So it's likely that the Nephites had previously experienced lightnings and tempests and thunders, maybe even a hurricane in their past. But yeah, this storm was different, Mormon said twice. So LDS scientists and LDS scholars who have studied these chapters in depth generally agree that this storm was not a hurricane at all, but rather a volcanic eruption. And that's kind of what we're going to talk about the rest of this discussion here, is why this volcanic eruption would fit a lot better than, say, tropical storm or a hurricane or something of that nature. Here's several references to some of these studies that have been done. We'll quote from a bunch of these today, but and there's more. Those are just kind of my favorites. So the general conclusions of each of these studies is that a volcanic eruption likely accounted for each or most of the destructions described in the text. For example, LDS geologist Bart Qualis found 21 descriptions of destruction in 3rd Nephi, and you can see that list there, and concluded that every single one of them, quote, have been documented in historic explosive volcanic eruptions in the past. So he argues that, okay, there's 21 of these destructions, and we've seen a volcano do all 21 of these things. So a volcanic eruption would also explain why this storm was different, why it had never been seen. Volcanic storms produce many of the same phenomena that traditional storms do, such as thunders, lightnings, whirlwinds, etc., but are a little bit different in nature. So let's talk about volcanic lightning. Mormon said there's exceedingly sharp lightning, such as never been known in all the land. So here's an image of a volcanic eruption in June of 2011, and you can see the lightning that it comes with it. It's kind of incredible to see it, honestly, I think. According to the journal Science, lightning is often seen around volcanic eruptions. One common type of lightning results when individual particles of ash violently rub against each other, generating huge amounts of static electricity. This image is really cool, I think. This is from eruption in 2011, Chile, and I mean you can see the smoke coming out of the volcano over there, and just how much lightning it brought with it. So powerful and just kind of impressive to look at. I think that's one of my favorite pictures. Okay, so how is volcanic lightning different? While it's hard for hurricane-induced lightning to spark fires due to rain, volcanic-induced lightning does not face the same wet environment, making it much easier to start fires. But in addition to lightning, there are also several other ways for an erupting volcano to spark a fire. According to Dr. Jeffrey Wynn, who's a world-renowned volcano scientist, just about anything within a hurricane's path can be set on fire due to, quote, hot winds of ash, rock, gas, and air, and the 600-degree heat associated with the pyroclastic flow. And look at the scripture in 3 Nephi. Behold, the city of Laman, the city of Josh, the city of Gad, the city of Kishkumen have I caused to be burned with fire, and the inhabitants thereof. So it wasn't just Zarahemla. There were 5 cities total that were burned. Very unlikely if it was a hurricane, much more likely if it was a volcano. This scripture is interesting, and this is the Lord speaking to them. I did send down fire and destroy them, that their wickedness and abominations might be withheld from my face. So the Lord said this fire came down, from the sky to the earth, which perfectly describes the pyroclastic flow of a volcano. I'm not even going to pretend to pronounce that volcano, the name of that volcano, but it erupted in the 1st century AD, and a survivor was recorded that, quote, fire rained down. That's how he described it. Fire rained down, so that those who were there were burned. Also gravel rained down. So kind of similar to what Mormon talked about. Okay, what about whirlwinds? The Book of Mormon mentions whirlwinds twice in connection with the volcano. And the second time, Mormon says that they were powerful enough that they carried men away. Where they went, no one knows. So, can a volcano cause whirlwinds? LDS geologist Jerry Grover. The best fit for the whirlwinds referred to in the Book of Mormon seem to be whirlwinds associated with volcanic eruption. Destructive whirlwinds that destroy buildings and take people and livestock are common in volcanic eruptions and have been reported in several eruptions over the last 200 years. And Dr. John Lund said, tephra is the ash which is blown out of the volcano's cone. When it shoots out of the volcano, it sucks the air around the cone upward, creating whirlwinds. The subsequent atmospheric trauma could induce additional whirlwinds. So here's an image of an erupting volcano in Hawaii, kind of a smaller volcano, but you can see the whirlwinds that it produced. Common. Okay, so far we've shown mounting evidence of a volcanic eruption in 3 Nephi. However, those aren't the reasons why most people believe that the volcano caused this destruction. The main reason has to do with the 3 days of darkness that followed. So I learned about the 3 days of darkness at a very young age, like I'm sure many of you did. And when I was a child, I assumed that those 3 days were worldwide. For most of my childhood, I just thought the world just, the Lord just turned off the lights of the sun and the whole world was left in darkness. And it wasn't until I was older that I read the following verse in the New Testament. And now, from the 6th hour, there was darkness over all the land until the 9th hour. So this is in connection with Christ's crucifixion. And the New Testament says they had darkness for 3 hours at the time of the crucifixion. So if the sun itself was darkened and refused to shine, as I supposed it as a child, I couldn't understand why was there light in Jerusalem only after 3 hours. And obviously the Lord didn't just dim the sun for three days in the Americas and let it shine in Jerusalem only after 3 hours, right? So how do we explain this? And I'm gonna go along with this again, that the Lord works in accordance with natural law, more often than not. So the Lord, in my opinion, likely used natural laws to accomplish this darkness. And Alvin Benson said, if the 3 days of darkness had been global, we would expect to find accounts of them in literature of other contemporaries, such as Romans, Greek, Chinese, Persians. But since it's only found in the Nephite writings, it must have only occurred in the land of the Nephites. And I think that's confirmed in the New Testament as well. So a volcanic eruption would explain to me why the Nephites experienced 3 days of darkness while the Jews only experienced 3 hours. And obviously I did want to mention that the darkness in the New Testament is unexplained. We don't really know what caused it. It could have been a storm that rolled through. We just don't know, but it was unrelated, obviously. And this point I want to make too is that the darkness caused by volcanic ash is the only known form of darkness that fits the Book of Mormon text scientifically. So if you want to explain the darkness as some miracle that the Lord did where he, stopped it from shining on the Nephites for 3 days and let it shine on the rest of the world, you're welcome to do that. But if you want to explain it scientifically, a volcano is the only way to do that. There's no other scientific explanation for how this darkness could have occurred. And the darkness caused by a volcano fits the text of the Book of Mormon very well. So how does the Book of Mormon describe this darkness? All right, so when the thunderings and lightnings and storms and tempests and the quakings of the earth did cease, behold, there was darkness upon the face of the land. So the storm came first and then came the darkness, which would kind of fit a volcanic eruption. There was thick darkness upon the face of the land, insomuch the inhabitants thereof who had not fallen could feel the vapor of darkness. So this darkness was thick, and you could feel it. Like it wasn't just dark. You could feel this vapor of darkness. And there could be no light because of the darkness, neither candles, neither torches, neither could there be fire kindled with their fine and exceedingly dry wood. So no light could be started, no fire could be started. And we'll read a quote here in a second why this fits the volcano very well. And then the Mormon describes it as mist of darkness as well. So these verses perfectly describe a volcanic eruption. When the oxygen in the atmosphere is replaced by dust and gas from a volcano's pyroclastic flow, you not only lose visibility, but you can actually feel the vapor of darkness as well. Mormon described it as a vapor of smoke, which, I mean, that describes a smoking volcano very well, I think. So there's the documentary on Netflix right now, called The Volcano Rescue from Wahakari. Curious, has anyone seen that? Oh, Dave, you have. What'd you think?
I've seen it. It's extremely frightening. I don't know. It was really cool though. They used to go out to the island all the time. 3 or 4 times a day they would have groups to go out there and they'd watch all the smoke, and then the volcano erupted while they were on the island and just burned everybody to shreds, whoever was on the island. And
yeah, there was about 50 people on the island and probably 10 survived, I want to say.
Yeah, it was a small amount of people that survived. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, many
Where
of them
is
survived.
Wakari?
Many of
New
them
Zealand.
survived, but they were burned so bad they died because of the burns, or if they survived, they were just extremely scarred.
Yeah. This is off the coast of New Zealand. So they would take tourists out by this boat and they would go look in this volcano and see all the, it was a lake essentially. And yeah, it erupted while people were on there. It's an interesting story and it is kind of sad, but if you're interested in that kind of thing, I would recommend it. But the reason I bring this up is there's something that one of the survivors said about this volcano that caught my attention. He's talking about the darkness that came over him when the smoke came. He said it was darker than any night I had ever experienced, which I thought was telling. Kind of described you know, the Book of Mormon darkness as well, just so dark.
And it wasn't just darkness; it was burning darkness. You know, you couldn't see anything, and you were being burned.
Yeah.
I mean, just a miserable experience.
Yeah. I mean, it's easy to see how like cities were able to catch fire and be burned, like with the amount of heat that came off of this. Kind of sad, but interesting.
The
Um,
ash traveled a long ways too. When Mount St. Helens erupted, my relatives were in Moses Lake and they said it covered the entire town with
And how-
thick ash.
How
And
far
that's
away was
hundreds,
Moses Lake?
several hundred miles.
Several hundred. That's incredible. So this darkness can be, it can travel a great distance, and yeah, I think that that's a strong. We can make a strong case for this being a candidate of the darkness in the Book of Mormon. So as I mentioned previously, the volcanic dust and gas makes lighting a fire near impossible. Dr. Jeffrey Wynn said, thick falling ash from a volcano is like dumping dirt on a campfire. It's just hard to light fire under that circumstances because the oxygen is just diminished and replaced with gas. Mormons stated that many were overpowered by the vapor of smoke and of darkness. So this darkness took the lives of many people who suffocated from its effects. And again, Dr. Jeffrey Wynn, volcanic ash is so thick that animals and people die from suffocation. This is not uncommon among volcanoes. This darkness did not just disappear after 3 days, but it dispersed gradually. I like that word that Mormon used. He said it dispersed, which is exactly what happens to the volcanic ash put into the atmosphere after an eruption. It doesn't just disappear, it slowly disperses. And similarly, the darkness seemed to arrive in different Nephite cities at different times. There's some discrepancies among the people when Mormon was writing his record, that some, suggesting some people were closer in proximity to the erupting volcano than others. This is the verse that I'm referring to. Behold, the great storm did last for about the space of 3 hours. It was said by some that the time was greater. Nevertheless, all these great and terrible things were done in about the space of 3 hours. And then behold, there was darkness upon the face of the land. David Palmer said, Mormon notes that there was a disparity of opinion on how long it took before things got pitch black. The amount of time would obviously vary depending on one's distance from the volcano. So based on the evidence, it would be extremely hard for anyone to argue that a volcanic eruption was not at least somewhat involved in the destruction. And like I mentioned before, it's possible that a volcano accounted for all of the destructions described in the Book of Mormon. However, there's a second scenario that is much more likely. Most LDS scholars and LDS geologists believe that the Nephites also experienced a massive earthquake in connection with this volcanic eruption. Why do they think that? Well, there's overwhelming evidence of a massive earthquake in the text. Here's a couple of scriptures. There's terrible thunder, which did shake the whole earth as if it was about to divide asunder. The earth was carried up on the city of Moroni, that in place of the city there became a great mountain. Highways were broken up. Great and notable cities were sunk. Many were shaken till the buildings thereof had fallen to the earth, and the inhabitants thereof were slain, and the places were left desolate. The whole face of the earth became deformed. The quakings of the earth did last for about the space of 3 hours, and the city of Moroni did sink into the depths of the sea. So, as you can see, like the description of this is describing like a massive earthquake as well. And I wanted to talk about that last one where the city of Moroni did sink into the depths of the sea. A similar thing happened to a city in Jamaica. In 1962, there was an earthquake in city off on the coast, Port Royal, sunk to the bottom of the ocean as a result of the earthquake. And you can see it there today. There's images of the city at the bottom of the ocean. There it is right there.
Right. Was that 1692?
Yeah. So if the Nephites did in fact experience an earthquake at this time, then that means they endured not one, but two natural disasters back to back. And if not back to back, perhaps even simultaneously. So the thing I wanted to point out is that this phenomenon of multiple natural disasters striking at the same time or back to back is not uncommon. Scientific studies have shown that one natural disaster can often trigger another within a matter of a few seconds. For example, when located on or near a fault line, earthquakes can often trigger volcanic eruptions, and volcanic eruptions can often trigger earthquakes. So, if the Nephites, yeah,
The earthquakes in Turkey, two earthquakes, one triggered the other probably.
yeah,
Days
that,
ago.
yeah, it's really incredible. And tsunamis, right? Earthquakes can trigger tsunamis, and like there's
Right.
natural disasters often cause other natural disasters. Kind of interesting. So it wouldn't have been that uncommon for this to have happened. So if they did experience both, which one came first? Did the earthquake cause the volcano, or did the volcano cause the earthquake? While both scenarios are possible, one scenario appears to be much more likely in the Nephite situation. Here's LDS geologist Jerry Grover. Volcanoes are known to generate earthquakes. However, most volcanic caused earthquakes are less than a magnitude 2 or 3. So in other words, while volcanic eruptions can trigger earthquakes, the earthquakes to follow are usually not very large. And since the Nephi earthquake was massive, then it stands to reason that the earthquake came first, which in turn caused a volcanic eruption, not the other way around. Okay, so I wanted to compare what we've learned tonight with the eruption at Mount St. Helens. And I wanted to look at the similarities between how the Mount St. Helens eruption is described and what we've just read about in the Book of Mormon. And so this is a quote, but I've underlined all the similarities that I was able to find for commentary from the Book of Mormon. So let me just read this. Investigation suggests that an earthquake measuring 5.1 on the Richter scale may have triggered the Mount St. Helens volcanic eruption on 18th of May, 1980. And as the side of the mountain slid down and the top was blown away, the resulting shockwave blew down all the timber and vegetation within 15 miles. Some survivors referred to the noise and shaking as like being next to ground zero in an atomic bomb blast. Visibility dropped to zero, and as the thick volcanic dust hid the sun, day became night as far away as 500 miles. Spokane, Washington, located just 250 miles east of the blast site, was in complete darkness at 3 p.m. Bolts of lightning flashed from Mount St. Helens, sparking numerous forest fires, and the air was so full of smoke and pumice that people could not survive outside. Volcanic ash and gases irritated skin, eyes, and lungs, making breathing extremely difficult and fires impossible to ignite. Many earthquakes and/or aftershocks accompanied the eruption, and mud and debris flows changed the surrounding landscape for miles around. What do you think? Any similarities? I think, yeah, go ahead.
My thought was, didn't they have a very good feeling that this was going to erupt? I mean, they started excavating people. So was it caused by the earthquake, or did they know it was coming and then the earthquake may have been caused by the volcano?
Yeah, that's interesting. I have to look. I know that earthquakes are really hard to predict, but volcanoes are a little bit easier to predict. But I don't know the answer to that. I mean, this report said that an earthquake may have triggered it, but who knows? Like, I haven't looked into it enough to know, but interesting. I don't know if any of you guys know.
But as far as your question with regards to the scripture, yes, I would agree that that would be a very good description of Third Nephi.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, and I have relatives both in Spokane and Moses Lake. Moses Lake, I looked up, is almost 300 miles away.
Uh-huh.
And they said the same thing, that it was completely dark and that ash got everywhere. It got inside the cars cars wouldn't start. It buried factories. It completely changed. That they had a sugar business in Moses Lake, and that volcano changed everything.
Contaminated the soil. Yeah.
It did. And they had always talked about Mount St. Helens, but I do think it was not expected to be then. I mean, they always were watching it, and yes, it was active, but I think that earthquake made it erupt. I don't think they were expecting an imminent
Okay,
eruption.
I appreciate
There
that.
was a volcanologist that was on site doing tests and he lost his life. I think there's a volcanologist that was there monitoring it that ended up being killed.
Yeah, it was a very active volcano
They were
site.
monitoring it because they
Yeah,
were expecting activity, just not quite as much.
right. I think that's right. If they were expecting some activity, there was activity, but the massive explosion that took that whole side of the mountain was unexpected. And I think that probably was because of the earthquake. Yeah.
We were living up in Western Canada at the time, and I was hauling concrete on this day, and it was like we were in the middle of a blizzard. Ash just was flowing down on us, and it was kind of grayish, whitish color, and it was like you were driving in a blizzard.
Interesting.
Well, they had ash for how many miles?
Yeah.
I mean, across Canada and the United States. I mean, it was just everywhere.
The description matches the dichotomy that the inconsistencies, I guess, in the two things. The city's on fire, but you can't start a fire. How is that? Well, they had the same experience. They had started fires, but you couldn't start a fire. That's interesting.
Yeah, very interesting. Yeah, I appreciate all those insights. I'm fascinated in this, and yeah, that's cool. So I appreciate it. Okay, Matthew Roper pointed this out. The year 1902 saw the eruption of the West Indies volcano St. Vincent. A geologist who studied the site in 1933, 31 years later, found that the soil from the volcano, which had been ash at the time of the eruption, had finally returned to a level comparable to that before the eruption. So it took the soil 30 years to go back to a level that it was prior. And this is significant because if you look at the Nephite text, it took them 26 years after this destruction before the Book of Mormon says they started really prospering again. 50 and 9 years had passed away, which was 26 years after the destruction. And the Lord did prosper them exceedingly in the land, yea, insomuch they did build cities again where there had been cities burned. So that may be a coincidence, but I don't know if it is or not. But it would make sense if that's the amount of time it took them to get their soil back to a level comparable to before the eruption. Okay, so the next two slides, I just want to put the conclusions of first our LDS scientists who have looked at this from a scientific standpoint, and then the next slide will be our scholars and some of their conclusions from these studies. So here's LDS geologist Bart Wallace. Geological studies and eyewitness accounts of volcanic activity show the likelihood that the massive destruction reported in 3rd Nephi was caused by an explosive volcanic eruption. LDS geologist Jerry Grover, in order to account for the destruction described in 3rd Nephi, it is clear that a volcano and a regional earthquake are indicated. And there's an LDS professor at BYU of geophysics, Alvin Benson. The very nature of earthquakes and volcanic activity are consistent with the whole set of phenomena recorded in 3rd Nephi 8 through 10. So earthquakes and volcanoes are kind of the leading candidates here. And then here's some conclusions from LDS scholarship. Dr. John Lund, in summary, a journal of a dozen scientists would concur that the events described in 3rd Nephi involved a volcanic eruption. David Palmer, based on the preceding data, I propose that a combination of earthquakes and volcanic eruptions were the natural forces unleashed on the Nephites and Lamanites. Brad Gardner, the Book of Mormon is very explicit in describing the physical events. As real world phenomena, they correspond to an explosive eruption of a volcano arising in a subduction zone or near an fault line earthquake. And cumulatively, third Nephi suggests a nearby volcanic activity and indeed in many cases earthquakes. So what do you think? Do you agree, disagree with these conclusions? Why or why not? Just curious to know some of your conclusions from this.
I agree.
Okay,
Makes complete sense.
okay. Anyone else?
Well, I don't know how
do.
it works, but I just know the gospel's true.
Yeah. Good deal. Well, I'm going to say a little more confidently this week that I mean, I have a pretty strong opinion on this, but the gospel is true regardless. So, anyone else?
I think it just makes sense that it was both of them,
Yeah.
because it's take the both of them together to bring about what you're describing,
Yeah.
or what third Nephi describes.
I like this next question. Why? Why do we care?
Let's see, because some of the same things have been forecasted in the coming, I mean, have been what prophesied are going to happen.
Well, John the Revelator does talk about, I think, volcanoes as part of the last days. So eventually, but no, that's not why I asked. I asked for a completely different reason. Because if true, then the Book of Mormon took place near a volcano.
Yeah, exactly.
Probably within 500 miles of one.
Yeah, you could be able to find and date volcanoes if you're really good.
Interesting.
There you
So
go.
let's look at that. So where in the Americas are the volcanoes located? Here's the Ring of Fire. I'm sure everyone's familiar with this. This is the part of the world where 75% of the Earth's volcanoes are located here, and 90% of the earthquakes occur along this path.
Lucky
So
Syria.
What's that?
Lucky Syria.
Yeah,
I
that's
got the outlier.
yeah, the outlier. Let's narrow this down even more. So the Ring of Fire. So we know that, I mean, it occurred in North America, and Moroni said, Joseph Smith, that the contents of the plates were on this continent. So where in North America are the volcanoes? Well, you can see them dotted here. So in 2014, LDS geologist Jerry Grover looked at every volcano, to Steve's point, in North America to see which ones could be candidates for the Book of Mormon volcano. He had two requirements. One, it had to have erupted in the 1st century AD. And two, it had to have sat on a fault line because an earthquake likely triggered the volcano to erupt. So those were his two candidates. And he looked at every single volcano in North America based on those two criteria. And how many do you think he found?
One.
Yeah, he found one. San Martin in southern Mexico. So here's a picture of San Martin, the volcano, and there it is on the map. Southern Mexico. And interestingly enough, so here's LDS geologist Jerry Grover. So he presented on his findings on this report that he did. And this volcano erupted in 1793. And this is the distribution of ash that it distributed. And this was not the most powerful eruption in its history. So, I mean, you can, if this volcano was erupted in the 1st century BC or AD more powerfully, it could have spread a lot bigger than this area. But that's the distribution of ash from the 1793 eruption, which was not its biggest again. So this ash was 400-mile radius distributed, although not the largest in its history. So coincidentally, this affected area on the map correlates to almost exactly where I believe the Book of Mormon events took place. And I came to that conclusion not from this presentation or study, but from other outside sources, and hearing this presentation kind of helped to confirm what I already believe. And so you guys can consider this presentation kind of my introduction to Book of Mormon geography. My next presentations may or may not expound on other reasons why I believe the Book of Mormon took place in this area. Again, these are my opinions. It's not doctrine. It's not a hard written rule anywhere in the church, but this is kind of a topic that I'm kind of passionate about and have been interested in a long time. And maybe over the coming months, I can present some other additional reasons why I believe that this was the area that the Book of Mormon took place. And with that said, I know that some of you have different opinions on this topic, and that's okay. I just I don't want to, you know, say this is the correct way, but I did want to express that this is my opinion on kind of my research and why I believe the Book of Mormon took place here. And so maybe in the you know coming months, I'll share a little bit more about why I believe that. But that's kind of
So Rick, can I interject something here?
Yeah.
So there's a senior couple that Adams, when they were serving in Santiago, Chile, that they actually had to share a hut with. This poor senior couple, there wasn't any other housing up 10,000 feet in the Andes where they were assigned for their mission area. And so this poor couple had to live with these two elders in this really awful little hut up in the Andes, 10,000 feet. But the senior couple were adamant believers in, and I wish I could remember the group of people that are actually excavating somewhere in the Missouri area, I think, where they totally believe that the Book of Mormon sites actually took place up there. Sure. And that they've got and I'm sure you've heard of this group. I'm just having a blank. What do you remember what the name is of the couple that has been spearheading that for years?
No, I don't. But I know that that is a common belief that the Book of Mormon took place in Missouri and, you know.
The Heartland.
Yeah, the Heartland.
Or something.
Yeah, but anyway, so Adam was writing this stuff to me. He says, this is what they think. I always thought it was, you know, kind of down there and in Mexico somewhere, you know, towards the southern part of Mexico. And so, of course, I talked to Dr. Esplin and just I don't know if this makes you feel any better, but Ron is thoroughly convinced that it's in that similar area, what you're saying.
Okay. Well, yeah, sure. It helps. We respect Ron for sure. But
one of the problems, and I guess one of the possibilities, and you can't just throw it out, is if you look at the New Madrid Fault, which is on the other side of Missouri from Independence, it had an eruption in about 1812. Not an eruption. There was an earthquake about 1812, and
wasn't it like a 9 on the Richter scale? I mean, it was massive, whatever it was.
And it went over several days.
Yeah.
And the reports, I mean, there was nobody there at the time, very few people there at the time, but those that were there on the river, whatever, they describe things that are just kind of the craziest things you've ever heard.
Like water running backwards? Running
backwards, things spouting, fountains spouting up out of the sea, out of the river. It was just amazing things that would be the same kind of stuff that would, and then the other question you'd have is if in that same area or fault area, and by the way, because of the hard surface, the tremors went much further than they do in typical, because of the hard pan under the actual rock under the that sits under the earthquake area. And if you had an earthquake or you had a volcano a couple thousand years ago, it might be hard to find the remnants of that unless it left a nice cone. And you look at the super volcano in Yellowstone, and it didn't leave a nice cone. I mean, you can see it after a while, but it doesn't. And of course, that's a lot more years, but hundreds of thousands, 600,000 years, I think is the period. But you never know. You never know. But I really like your analysis, and I think that's kind of the question. For this area to stay in the running, you ought to be able to show that kind of activity, and if you can pin that activity back to the first century, were they able to pin that eruption back to 34 BC AD?
Well, it's not an exact science, and you're not going to pinpoint the exact date, but you can get pretty close, within 100 years.
Hey,
Well-
Rick,
Yeah.
I'm extremely excited about this. Rick and I have had debates on this. I am a Heartland model guy. I'm all about the Heartland, the
Well, then what's
Nephites
the
and things
name of
taking
the
place.
couple that's been heading that up? I can't remember. Do you remember who it is?
Well, I think like May, I think his name is. I don't know.
Oh, okay.
But I'll tell you,
Anyway.
I'll tell you a story. Linda threw out a story about Dr. Esplin. I wanted to throw a story out as well with regards to him. And he was walking his dog one day, and I said, "Hey, what do you think? Where did it take place?" And he says, "Well, there's evidence for all kinds of things." And I said, "I think it took place in America." And he goes, "Well, possibly." I'll tell you a quick story. And his story was this: at the church office building one day, I can't describe it. You have to go to him for the exact wording. But the Mesoamericans were debating with the Heartland people, and it got kind of heated, as it can. And President Monson happened to be in that same area, and President Monson stopped the whole thing and said, let me tell you something. If I don't know where it took place, and he was in the first presidency at the time, then it doesn't matter. And that was what Ron told me. And I thought, that's true. It really doesn't, but there's been some great debates back and forth, and I welcome this because it's exciting. When we study the Book of Mormon, we want to see it come alive in our own time and things, and it can, as we look at this, and we're like, wow, maybe it took place here, maybe it took place in Illinois area. I mean, all these great things. So I look forward to hearing more about this. And I thought your presentation with regards to volcanoes and earthquakes was probably spot on. It was, yeah.
Thanks, Dave. Anyway, that's all I had for you guys.
So how do you explain, Dave, the maps that you get at Adam-on-Diamond that supposedly Joseph Smith drew, showing Moroni's path through the Midwest on his way to New York?
I've posed things in front of Rick many times, and I said, "What do you explain this?" And Rick always comes back and says, "There's a lot of misleadings on different things, and even the early apostles who talked immensely about the Indians being the Native Americans being directly related to the Nephites." Rick always has some sort of a combat with regards to that comment. So I don't have anything myself, but I know Rick might have something to either be for that or against it. But the realization is there's a lot of conjecture, and I don't know if we will know that for quite some time.
Yeah, I'll agree with that. There's a lot of conjecture. I've seen those handwritten maps that show Moroni traveling from southern Mexico through Utah, across the Midwest to New York to bury the plates. Whether or not they got that info from Joseph Smith, I mean, I believe it obviously because I'm a Mesoamerica, believer, but we just don't know.
Well, we do know that he was where the Manti Temple was.
Yeah.
Because Brigham Young said, well, Moroni dedicated this spot. This is where the temple's going to be built.
Yep. St. George as well, I believe.
Yeah.
Anyway, I appreciate you guys. Let me have a few minutes. I'll leave that with you in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. If anybody's interested, the two guys on the Heartland thing, their names are Rod Meldrum and Bruce Porter. And
That's
it's not
right.
Bruce Porter, who is the general authority. It's a different Bruce Porter. They've done a lot of DNA stuff on stuff too.
Mhm.
Well, thank you very much.
Well done, Rick.